Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with the country bracing for a decision from 12 jurors chosen to decide the fate of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Protests have already begun tonight, something we could see every night until a verdict is reached over the killing of George Floyd. And while we don't know how long it will take for the now sequestered jury to reach that verdict, the decision by these 12 people will almost certainly reverberate well beyond the confines of that courtroom. The question at stake is simple. Will yet another death of a black person at the hands of police be overlooked? Will George Floyd's name be placed alongside Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Philando Castile, and so many others in which the officers involved in those killings were not held accountable? And of course, that doesn't even cover the countless others who never even had their day in court to try to hold their killers accountable. Or will a family in this country finally see some justice against someone who took an oath to protect and serve? Will there be some accountability for what can only be described as a continued and growing epidemic of police violence in America? Before the jury began deliberating, the prosecution and the defense made their closing arguments. The prosecution told jurors they just need to believe their own eyes and their common sense.
A knee to the neck, a knee to the back, twisting his fingers, holding his legs for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, the defendant's weight on him. The lungs in his chest unable to expand because there wasn't enough room to breathe. George Floyd tried. This wasn't policing. This was murder.
And the prosecution also described Chauvin ignoring Floyd's final cries for help. And now Chauvin may have been affected by the crowd, but not the way that the defense had portrayed them.
The defendant facing down that crowd. They were pointing cameras at him, recording him, telling him what to do, challenging his authority, his ego, his pride. Not the kind of pride that makes you do better, be better. The kind of ego-based pride that the defendant was not going to be told what to do. He was not going to let these bystanders tell him what to do. He was going to do what he wanted, how he wanted, for as long as he wanted.
Remember, at one point, eyewitness Charles McMillan told Floyd, "You can't win." And Floyd cried out, "I'm not trying to win." But as the prosecution pointed out, Chauvin was trying to win. For its part, the defense rested its closing argument, telling the jury that they didn't actually see what was clear on all of those videos. And while police officers can make mistakes, the blame for George Floyd's death, at least per the defense, rests with George Floyd himself.
You have to be convinced that the defendant's actions caused the death of Mr. Floyd. Actions that happened before Mr. Floyd was arrested, that had nothing to do with Officer Chauvin's activities, are not the natural consequences of the defendant's actions. The drug ingestion, right? The bad heart, the diseased heart, the hypertension. All of these things existed before Mr. Chauvin arrived.
In its rebuttal, the prosecution made this final statement to the jury.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. You heard that testimony. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.